Okay, so today we're talking about circumference. If you think back to yesterday when we were looking at vocabulary terms for circles, circumference told us that it's the distance around the outside of a circle, or it's also kind of like the perimeter of a circle. So today we're going to look at how to find circumference. There's two ways to do that. We have two different formulas for using one for radius and one for diameter to find the circumference of a circle. So let's start by writing our two formulas for circumference. Okay, now for circumference, we're going to use the letter C, C for circumference, and circumference is found by multiplying pi, and pi is the number we get when we divide circumference and diameter. We get pi, and that is a number 3.14. So actually, if you want to, at the top of your paper, write pi equals 3.14. That's what we commonly know pi as. Pi is actually a really long decimal, 3.14159. I mean, it goes on forever and it never repeats. So that's why at the beginning of the year, we looked at pi, which was that super long decimal. And since it never repeats and it never ends, then it is an irrational number. But we need to remember that pi is 3.14, and we're going to use that in a formula. So I wasn't finished here, so it's not just circumference equals pi, but circumference equals pi times diameter, okay? Now remember, the diameter is the length from one edge of the circle to the other edge of the circle through the center, okay? So we have a formula to find circumference using diameter. We also have a formula for circumference using radius, which is from the center out to one edge of the circle. It's just halfway across the circle. And that formula is circumference equals 2 times pi times r. Now, these formulas are actually the same thing because 2 times radius is actually the same as diameter, okay? Let's use, let's look at an example, like say that diameter right here, say diameter is 8 inches in that circle. Let's say that length is 8 inches. Now, the radius would be halfway across that whole thing. It's from the center to one outside edge. So that would be the radius right there. So half of the full 8 inches, half of it would be 4 inches. So the radius would be 4 inches. Now, let's think about this. We could plug diameter into this formula using that 8, but if we look at this formula, 2 times the radius, 2 times 4 is 8. So these formulas are actually pretty much the same thing, but it just helps to have two different ones because instead of thinking about converting your diameter into radius or converting your radius into diameter before you put numbers into your formula, you can just look at whatever they give you, whether they give you just diameter or just the radius. You don't have to convert anything before you put your numbers into whichever formula you need to use. But just make sure if you're only given diameter, you use diameter. If you're only given radius, you use the radius formula, okay? So let's use these formulas in an example, okay? So here's our first example. Example 1. All right, so we want to find the circumference of, let's use this circle up here. So we'll draw it one more time. And we know the diameter is 8 inches. Diameter equals 8 inches. So that's the circle we're going to use in our example. Okay, so step 1, identify the diameter. Okay, we know it's 8 inches. So diameter is 8 inches. We've identified it. Then step 2, use the formula. Okay, we know we're going to solve for C, circumference, and we have diameter. So we're going to plug our 8 inches into this formula right here. So before I calculate anything, I just want to write my numbers in my formula. Now, you don't have to write 3.14 times 8 yet. You can just remember that that pi, if you write that, that still means 3.14, always, okay? So we've written out our formula, and now we substituted the 8 for the diameter. Now we can substitute 3.14 in for pi, okay? Now we have the two numbers that we're going to be multiplying together, and let's go ahead and multiply them. 3.14 times 8. Well, 8 times 4 is 32. 8 times 1 is 8, plus 3 is 12, or 11, sorry. And 8 times 3 is 24, plus 1 is 25, okay? And now we have 2 decimal places, so we have 2 decimal places in our answer. So that means circumference equals 25.12 inches. That would be the distance around this circle with a diameter of 8 inches. Okay? All right, so let's do another example. Example 2. So now we're going to be using a radius. Okay? So here is our next circle, and it has a radius of 14 feet. 14 feet. So let's go ahead and write that. Radius is 14 feet. We've identified our radius. Now the next step is to write out our formula. Okay, circumference equals 2 pi r. That's the one we're going to use because they gave us radius. So we're going to use the formula for radius. So we're going to keep the 2, multiply it by pi, and then instead of writing r, we're just going to substitute 14 in for radius. Okay, so now at this point, you can go ahead and say 2 times 14, which is 28, and multiply that times pi. 14 times 2 is 28, so we can write 28 times pi. Because remember, multiplying 3 things together, it doesn't matter in what order you multiply them. They're all just going to be multiplied together at the end. So 28 times pi, we can rewrite that as 28 times 3.14. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. 3.14 times 28. Okay, 8 times 4 is 32. 8 times 1 is 8, plus 3 is 11. 8 times 3 is 24, plus 1, 25. Placeholder. 4 times 2 is 8. 2 times 1 is 2. 3 times 2 is 6. And then add together. And we get 87.92. So that is our circumference, 87.92 feet. All right, and that is the distance around the outside of this circle. Very good.